Well, it looks like this day has come. The United States of America has officially announced plans to withdraw from NATO. If before these were just rumors and speculation, today 3 of the most important officials of the United States have stated that they see no point in the US remaining in the North Atlantic Alliance. These officials are US President Donald Trump, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and US War Minister Pete Hegseth, which indicates the seriousness of the statements. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that Washington will have to reconsider its relationship with NATO after the end of the war with Iran. Donald Trump added that this will inevitably happen since the Europeans did not help him in the war against Iran. And Pete Hegseth added that the war in the Middle East has demonstrated what US allies are really prepared for when it comes to large-scale actions in the name of the free world. At the same time, it became known that European countries, one after another, closed their airspace to American aircraft carrying out strikes against Iran. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start this episode, I ask you to support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation, paid subscription, or sponsorship on YouTube. How can you do that? All links and details are in this video's description. At the end of the episode, if you find it interesting and useful, you can leave your donation in any way that's convenient for you. There, believe me, you'll find different platforms and bank details, crypto wallets, PayPal, Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and YouTube sponsorship. In general, just pick something that suits you best, and don't forget to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is also in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as soon as it comes in. So, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that Washington will have to reconsider its relationship with NATO after the war with Iran ends. The reason for Rubio's statement was that there is virtually no support from the alliance for the US operation against Iran. In particular, Marco Rubio lashed out at NATO members for their refusal. The reason is access to military bases after President Donald Trump previously called the partners cowards and the alliance itself a paper tiger. So, Trump first attacked the allies, insulted them in every possible way, then Rubio says, listen, why aren't the allies helping us? He says, we ask for help and they say no, goodbye. Next, I'll quote Marco Rubio. President Trump and our country will have to reconsider all of this after the operation is over. If NATO comes down to us only protecting Europe in case of an attack, but at the same time they deny us the right to base our forces when necessary, then that's not a very good arrangement. It's hard to remain a member of the alliance in such a situation. First of all, I want to immediately point out and remind Marco Rubio how NATO actually came about, and remind him how after World War II, the US itself imposed its protection on Europe. Let me remind you that in fact the Americans did not withdraw their, you could say, occupation troops, from Germany for example. They withdrew these troops from Europe as a whole and said, listen, Europeans, you focus on the economy and we will take care of your defense. The Americans pushed this idea on the Europeans and now Marco Rubio is questioning why it's this way. If it all comes down to the fact that we're protecting them, then should we just leave? Well, it's strange that he doesn't remember his own history. But what else upset Marco Rubio so much? The main reason for the US's dissatisfaction was how it was handled. Spain, to start with, which closed its airspace to American planes participating in operations against Iran. The restrictions imposed by Madrid certainly complicate flights of American military aircraft to and from the Middle East, but they do not make them impossible. In addition, the Spanish have also closed some military bases to the Americans. The Spanish Minister of Defense stated, quote, we will not allow the use of the Moron and Rota military bases for any actions related to the war in Iran. Madrid made this clear to the American government from the very beginning. The purpose of such a ban is to prevent any actions that could lead to an escalation of the conflict. Earlier, the country's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez stated, quote, all flight plans that included actions related to the operation in Iran were rejected, including tanker aircraft. So, in other words, Spain has closed its airspace to American aircraft attacking Iran. But as it turned out, this was only the beginning. The day before, Trump reacted sharply to France's decision not to allow American planes carrying military cargo, which were heading to Israel, through its airspace. Next, I'll quote Trump. France did not allow planes carrying military cargo to Israel to fly over its territory. I consider Paris's position to be very unhelpful in the context of the war with Iran. France has proven to be very unhelpful regarding the Iranian Avenger, who has already been eliminated. The US will remember this. Later, it became known that Italy also refused to allow US bombers to land at the Sigonella base. This was reported by Corriere della Sera. The decision was made personally by Italy's Minister of Defense, Guido Crosetto, after an urgent call from Chief of Staff Luciano Portalano. And here is an interesting story. It turned out that the Americans were so self-confident that they didn't even ask the Italians for permission to land their bombers. According to the publication, a few nights ago, the command of the Italian Air Force simply received the flight plan of the American bombers. And they were very surprised because the flight plan showed that these bombers were supposed to land in Sigonella and then fly to the Middle East. The problem was that no one in the US Air Force had officially requested permission from Italy to land. The route was simply reported only when the planes were already in the air. Imagine, the Italian military received information that these flights were not regular or logistical and did not fall under the bilateral agreement between Italy and the US. So basically, the Americans just wanted to trick their way into landing their planes, and they didn't even warn the Italians about it. Interestingly, the Italian Minister of Defense Guido Crosetto explained that the planes themselves had a special mark, a so-called warning. Such aircraft are not allowed to land without prior approval, except in emergency situations. But again, the US did not request approval and just blatantly flew straight to Italy. As a result, the Italian Minister of Defense made a direct statement. Sigonella is off limits, and there was no authorization, no prior consultations were held. As a result, the American planes were already in the air looking for somewhere to land. But, as is known, NATO members mostly rejected Trump's requests for help in reopening the Hormuz Strait, which Iran had effectively closed, threatening retaliatory measures after the war began. The closure of this transport corridor led to a sharp increase in oil and gas prices. However, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio assures, he says that after the war the Hormuz Strait will be opened. Can you imagine, quote, "When this operation is over, the strait will be opened. One way or another. It will be opened because Iran will agree to comply with international law and not block this shipping route, or a coalition of countries from around the world and the region with the participation of the US will ensure its opening." Rubio insists a global and regional coalition, including the US, will open it. Fine, but since the US started this war, they should unblock it themselves. At the same time, US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth made it clear that the administration of US President Donald Trump was dissatisfied with the actions of NATO allies during the war with Iran. He stated, quote, "A lot has become obvious." According to him, the war demonstrated what US allies are really prepared for when it comes to large-scale actions in the name of the free world. Hegseth also lamented that even in situations where we're talking about missiles that don't reach the territory of the United States itself, but threaten allies and other countries, Washington still doesn't get full support, but rather hesitation. Quote from Hegseth. When we ask, I emphasize, when we ask for additional assistance or basic overflight access, we get questions, obstacles, or hesitation. Alliance cannot be considered truly strong if individual countries are not ready to stand by when Washington needs it. But you know what's interesting about this quote? First, Donald Trump publicly states several times that he doesn't need anyone's help and that the US isn't asking anyone for such help. And then his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, comes out and says, listen, when we do ask for help, for some reason we're refused. I'd really like to understand why. I ask you to support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation, paid subscription, or sponsorship on YouTube. How can you do this? All the links and details are in the description of this video. And subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link is also in the description of this video. Thank you.